Hey leaders, in this episode of Leading Collaborative Response, Lorna and I sit down to discuss the value of including our educational assistants or paraprofessionals as part of the collaborative team meeting. We know that they have a vast toolbox to be able to access, as well as wanting to empower their voice as part of the conversation. So we discuss why having that role in our team meetings can be valuable, as well as some strategies for how we can do that within your school. So let's get started.
Are you a leader who is navigating the nuances of leading collaborative response in your school or district? Are you unsure of what collaborative response is? Are you looking to understand the critical role leadership plays when establishing and refining a collaborative response approach?
Collaborative response began as a grassroots approach to focus on the needs of students through a framework of collaboration. That approach has grown to a movement that is training leadership and education.
Through the Leading Collaborative Response podcast, Kurtis and I share our own experiences of leading collaborative response and lessons learned as we continue to learn and gain insight through the experiences of working alongside others. We also have the opportunity to engage in conversations with school and divisional leaders implementing the framework in their own organizations.
We know great leaders build great teams because that is what every child deserves. Subscribe to the Leading Collaborative Response podcast and join the thousands of schools seeing success for students through intentional and focused collaborative efforts. This week, we really want to dig into a question that arises often, and that is the involvement of our educational assistants in collaborative team meetings. So let's go. We often hear the comment come to us in regards to who should we include in our collaborative team meetings. And of course, we want our classroom teachers in place. That's definitely one of the absolute purposes of the collaborative team meeting, is to explore classroom practice and what we're doing at the classroom level for students.
And our administrators are absolutely critical in this work too.
And depending on the school, what the composition is or configurations, we always had our learning support teacher involved in each and every collaborative team meeting. But we do see schools where they'll have multiple specialized roles and will bring different people in.
Counselors, family school liaisons. There's a lot of different roles that different people, the different schools have, that it's greatly advantageous to have them part of it because they come with a different perspective and they come with varying strategies and ideas that sometimes go beyond the classroom.
Let's look at the role of educational assistant. Now, depending on your context, you may refer to these valued individuals in our schools as teacher assistants, student assistants, paraprofessionals, support staff. We're going to utilize educational assistants, or EAs, as that's the languaging that we are most familiar with. And really, it's anyone within the school typically in place to help support more intensive needs for students that are identified who are non-certificated staff within the building that don't hold the education degree, or if they do, are in that supporting role. So why would we want to have our educational assistants in a collaborative team meeting? There's really two purposes, and that is accessing their expertise as well as growing expertise. So let's first talk about the accessing.
So first of all, I would say if you at all can navigate the schedule and the timetable to include your educational assistants, it is so good to do that.
Absolutely.
Both for the expertise that they bring to the table, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but also how it empowers them and how it makes them feel part of the process and part of the decision making, especially when it comes to some of the students that they are closely tied with. So we would really encourage you to figure out a way to have your educational assistants a part of that.
And we are definitely going to share some different strategies that we've seen for that as well.
So for sure, we value their voice, and in that, often educational assistants have been in a number of classrooms
Absolutely.
over their time in the school. So if you just even think of a small scope of 5 years, and many of our educational assistants are in schools for 20 plus years, but you think even within a scope of 5 years, how many classrooms, or potentially how many classrooms, that educational assistant has been able to be in. And when they're in those classrooms, they're in that unique role of supporting students there, but they also are listening and learning from different classroom teachers, and they're taking in all of those ideas and strategies as they're in these different classrooms. So they have just a breadth of ideas when it comes to those differentiated instructional supports.
So I was just in a collaborative team meeting at a school here this past week, and it was happening after school where EAs were involved, and it really stood out to me as well when we would start talking about different things that were coming up, of somebody jumping in and saying, oh, I've done some training around that, or I once had a student and then had to be involved in some professional learning. There was a deep toolbox that was held by the educational assistants because they had undergone some further training and professional development opportunities that a number of the teachers around the table had not had an opportunity to do, just because of that designated role that they were either currently holding or had held in the past. So I don't think we should discredit the expertise that comes from our educational assistants.
Absolutely.
It's massive.
The other side of that is that many of our paraprofessionals are working alongside students with high needs. And for those students with high needs, they typically are engaging speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, and all of those people come with a wealth of ideas and strategies that support that particular student. Usually the conversation is around one student, but we know that lots of those ideas are helpful for many, many students across the classroom.
So we often talk about the purpose of the collaborative team meeting is to be able to expose and explore each other's toolboxes. And when we bring in that specialized toolbox, that just makes the entire team stronger. It goes back to that adage we talk about over and over again, that when you're building cultures of collaboration, we want to create a space or an understanding that every person here is an expert, has expertise, but then each of us are a learner. So let's go to where you said how empowering it is for our educational assistants to be in those collaborative team meeting conversations.
So about a year ago, I was in a school doing a school feedback. So just having that opportunity to interact with teachers, with admin, with the specialists in the school, but I had a chance to be able to spend some time with a couple of educational assistants in that school as well. And they spoke about the value of being part of the collaborative team meeting, and especially in that learner side of things. But then they also talked about how it made them feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how important it was for them in their role to be able to add to the conversation, and they felt that they were valued.
Absolutely.
Which is such an important part of what we do in those collaborative structures.
I also think, too, just like every other individual around the table, the richness that we can take away from it, and consider this professional development in each and every collaborative team meeting that we're having, that when a teacher can share, well, here's a strategy I've used within my room, everybody gets stronger, including our educational assistants. And I think one of the keys that I've found overall is, you mentioned the expertise of working with highly specialized students with highly specialized needs, but lots of times in these conversations we start exposing universal practices that could go beyond. And I've witnessed as a leader the opportunity for an educational assistant to be able to jump in and say, well, what if I could do this? Or on a day when my student's not around, or next week, the student I'm normally working with is going to be away. What if? And we often tell the story of, we'll be right back to continue this episode.
With ongoing use of the continuum of supports, we recognize the importance of establishing common practices at Tier 1 that are consistent from classroom to classroom. This ensures that every child will have access to consistent, effective instructional practices across the whole school. Join us for the online workshop, 5 Considerations when Refining Tier 1 of Your Continuums of Support, part of our Supporting Collaborative Response series. In this workshop, I will share 5 ways to articulate common practices that establish the foundation for Tier 1 across the school. I'll also be sharing numerous resources, templates, and samples. Register today to learn more about this critical step in the continued development of your continuum of supports, integral within a school's collaborative response.
And now back to our conversation. In that specific conversation of a group of students, it ended up being that we wanted to get some additional reading practice time in. And it was outside of our locus of control to say, well, if only the parents would do the home reading that I send home. Well, we may not be able to impact that, but we were having the conversation that those students we were concerned about, they were arriving early.
They were actually the same ones that were coming and sometimes causing some interesting situations on the playground first thing in the morning.
And it was one of our educational assistants who said, what if I was to grab them right first thing in the morning before the entry bell even went, did their home reading practice, do that little bit of practice with them each and every day, and maybe that would be something that we could put in place. And again, if we hadn't had that individual in the conversation, that support wouldn't have been exposed as an idea.
No.
But we also then were able to flip it to be able to say, all right, well, if you're starting 15 minutes early to be able to do this with the students, maybe what we can do is have you leave 15 minutes early at the end of the day. And it worked out that worked really, really well for everyone involved. And the educational assistant in that place actually appreciated being able to get that start out before the bus craziness had come in. Again, it was a really simple solution, but spoke to how empowered that team member was, and to be able to offer just a simple little idea that had huge impact, not just on the additional practice that we were trying to put in place for students, but the one-on-one or one-to-small group in time. Adult support right at the start of the day helped with so many regulation issues as well. Again, wouldn't have happened if that person wasn't in.
When we think about those what-if conversations, it is such a simple little phrase, but we have seen such incredible ideas come out of beginning that sharing with that little phrase, what if? And so many new ideas are generated when we start with that what if. I also think about our educational assistants in terms of being kind of that observation person in the classroom, and not intentionally, but just because they're there and seeing things happen in a classroom. We often, as teachers, don't recognize some of the strategies that we're doing. We just do them. It's just a natural thing. And something that is obvious to me and just seems like it's something that everyone would do is not something that I would bring up in a collaborative team meeting. But with the educational assistants in the room, they sometimes will bring up some of those strategies that are just natural to some teachers that we need to make explicit. And they'll bring those forward, which is really empowering to both our educational assistants and to our teachers to recognize that even the smallest idea can make a difference to kids.
Okay, so we hope we've convinced you why. Now let's talk about how, because we know that oftentimes there's contractual obligations that are at play. Sometimes the assignment to a student with highly complex needs is such that we cannot pull this person away for that little bit of time. Let's share some different ideas that we've seen within this. So obviously, if your collaborative team meetings are happening outside of the timetable. So for instance, the school I was at, it was time that they had dedicated at the end of the day once a month, and they just made it part of the contractual time. And I've seen multiple examples. I even did this as a principal too, to be able to say, we would like to have you for this 45 minutes outside of what would be your normally contractual time once a month, which means we have to bank that.
And provide that release.
Provide that time so that it may mean that on a certain day, you're going to have an opportunity to go home early or come in a little bit earlier, because we're going to bank some of that time that then we can utilize as well.
Yeah, another thing that I've heard some schools using is that idea that our collaborative team meetings do not need to be the same group that is meeting for collaborative planning. So if you've got a grade level group that is meeting, then that is critical that they have something in common in terms of instruction. But when it comes to the collaborative team meeting, because what we're trying to elicit is a lot of different differentiated instructional strategies. So that really doesn't matter who the people are who are coming together.
Right.
When we think about our educational assistants, there might be a little bit more flexibility when we try to bring the educational assistants in at a time that they're available, as opposed to the time that they are connected with their grade level.
Or a certain student cohort, for instance. I've also seen in schools where they will say, we would like for individual A to be part of this conversation. So they would actually cycle somebody else in. For instance, if that person was helping to support a student, someone else would provide that coverage for allow some time in. I saw one school where it was even that the educational assistant, just because of their role that they were engaged in and the student they were supporting, couldn't be there for the whole thing, but came in for the celebrations and for the first key issue, and then could go, in this one case, they would spell somebody else off so that person then could come in and be part of that conversation as well.
So just thinking about it beyond, the typical scheduling that we do for our teachers, it doesn't have to be the same. It could be a little bit more flexible, and it could be that we're drawing them into a team whenever there's a possibility to bring in those EAs.
Yeah, so for instance, I think about situation in our school where we had an EA that was working with a couple of students who needed additional behavioral supports within the classroom, but when those students went to a phys ed class, for instance, that same support wasn't needed in that particular circumstance for those certain students. So that would have been a time where we could say, all right, this person, we could take them off. And actually there was huge value in having a time during the day where the student didn't become really highly over-dependent on the adult that was with them all the time, to have that break in the day, and then that could free up our educational assistant to be part of our collaborative team meeting conversations.
The other thing that we sometimes see, especially in elementary schools, or K-12 schools too, is that a number of our educational assistants are in those early years. And so we try to navigate, the grade 1 group that has 4 educational assistants with them, and then it becomes really difficult to create that space for that whole team. But consider using those EAs that are in those lower grades to be able to be part of the upper level teams.
As we bring this to a close, I think one of our key messages is don't wait until it's perfect. I've had a school
Just
saying,
start trying.
we haven't quite figured out how to bring in our EAs yet, but we've started and we're looking for different innovative ways that we could do that. And I love that approach. Again, it goes back to that ready, fire, aim. Just get started, put it in place, and then let's start to play with some ideas and fine-tune to bring in all of our valued colleagues into those conversations.
And the other thing is to really think about, first, your educational assistants have tons to contribute, but on the other side, it is a great experience for them to be learning and are empowered by being part of those conversations.
And really, if we're looking at a culture of collaboration, it is an all hands on deck. We all have a role to play in the success of our students and how we respond. We hope that this has given you a few ideas, a few things to be able to chew on. As always, reach out. Let us know if you found some innovative ways to bring different team members
We would
into
love to hear that.
into your collaborative team meetings. And as always, reach out if you have any further questions or comments. With that, we look forward to engaging with you next time. Take care, everyone.
See you soon.
For more on collaborative response, visit jigsawlearning.ca or join the JL Insider to receive access to newly added resources and content. Make sure to follow us on social media. Subscribe to the podcast and the Jigsaw Learning YouTube channel to access past and upcoming episodes. Join us again to continue to build your own capacity and leading collaborative response in your context.